So one of the issues that philosophers have dealt with since, for the last 2,500 years is certainty possible. As for certain truth, no man has known it, nor shall he know it, neither of the gods, nor yet of all the things of which I speak. For even if by chance he were to utter the final truth, he would himself not know it, for all is but a woven web of guesses. Things have not really changed much over the last 2,500 years. This is still very true. And not just from a philosophical standpoint, but if you look at science, which is what I've spent my career in, it absolutely applies to science. People think that science is the only certain stuff and all the rest of it is not. It's actually the other way around. Science is always mutable and changeable. And the really good scientists know this. All our science measured against reality is primitive and childlike, and yet it's the most precious thing we have. Now, then I start asking people about this topic, and I said, well, do you see this in your field? Of course, everybody sees it. It doesn't matter what your field is. You see people who jump to conclusions about things without having adequately thought about it. And we're all guilty. Every one of us does this, especially in fields that we don't understand. Our so-called scientific knowledge is, in fact, conjecture, and is, in principle, always replaceable by something that may be nearer to the truth. So every scientific statement is an approximation, is basically what he said. Now, he's a philosopher, but really good scientists would look at this statement and immediately agree with it, people like Einstein. But without going into all the details of how Eric Hoffer caused me several sleepless nights, I finally realized what he was trying to say about complex topics. And this is my curve that I developed as a result of thinking this over. If you have a very complex topic, whether it's in drug interactions or the economy or poverty or whatever. Global warming, the perfect example. Global warming, let's use that as an example. Well, most of us are over here. Most of us in this room, are there any global warming experts out there? Okay, most of us are over here. In order to really be able to get a handle on it, you have to have four things. I mean, the four, what is it called?
Four-way test.
The four-way test. Well, you've got to do a four-way test for this as well, because number one, you have to have the expertise. I don't have the expertise in global warming to be able to look at all those studies and read everything and talk to the scientists. I don't have that. I have to have the time and the inclination. I don't have either one of those either. But finally, there's another really critical element in the fourth part of this thing, is that the topic has to be amenable to solution. It has to be amenable to this process. So what is the process? Well, you start out in ignorance, then if you have the ability, time, inclination, whatever, you do a whole lot of study and reflection, and for a really complex topic like global warming, it takes an enormous amount of effort. Then eventually you'll reach peak complexity when you start to see patterns, things you could throw away, and eventually then you can start to simplify this intelligently. In other words, you start to throw away the stuff that doesn't fit or it is extraneous. The patterns start to emerge, and you say, wait a minute. I mean, this is, and when scientists that are in this stage, joy is not too strong a word to describe what they're going through. And then eventually, if they're really lucky and if the topic allows it, they end up with authentic simplicity, where they really have gone through all of this process and they say, aha, now we know. Now with global warming, we can't talk. Yeah.
I already have a question.
Yes.
Section B, study and reflection.
Right.
What if you seek out authorities
Yes.
that have done
Absolutely.
all that work for you, and you get their opinion? Do you get to bypass that and go on?
I was actually just going to bring that issue up.
Okay.
And that's an excellent point, because we have to do that. I mean, you have to get advice from the expert to know when to plant your begonias or whatever. I mean, for even smaller things, you need that. So yes, the problem with experts is that you really have to be careful about taking their advice, because the experts can be biased. They can have an agenda. They may not truly be experts, but they sound like it. For all I know, politics, perfect example. So you have to depend on experts for making many decisions in your life. And sometimes you have no choice. You say, well, I really don't know. And so you kind of look at what all the experts are saying, and sometimes the consensus of all the experts is wrong. And we don't even consult the really true experts and try to analyze, who's right, etc. We just take the premature factulation step. And then we end up with pseudo-simplicity instead of authentic simplicity, so cross-tab authentic. this is what we do, which is fine as long as you keep your opinions to yourself. But if you do this, and then you stand on the soapbox, and politics is one example of this, and you stand on the soapbox and you say, this is what we need to do, and this is all you've done, then we get into trouble in a hurry. And it's also the same thing, not just in politics, but other areas as well. Economists have been guilty of this in the past. So, and it's also even more dangerous when they've gone partway up here, and they know all the lingo, and they know how to snow you with all the terminology, and then they make this this move.
So this is the fallacy of the internet being the expert and correct source.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what happens.
So we have a whole generation of people coming up that think that that's...
Absolutely. And those people that make announcements on the internet are frequently a little bit way up the curve so that they can sound as though they know what they're talking about. Absolutely. That's it. A little knowledge is more successful than complete knowledge. It conceives of things as simpler than they are, and thus resulting in opinions that are more comprehensible and persuasive. So a little knowledge is actually dangerous. I mean, we all heard that. But as Nietzsche said, it really is more dangerous because those people really sound like they know what they're talking about. You're right. I'm sure many of you have heard H.L. Mencken, who is the champion curmudgeon of all time. He's got to be. For every complex problem, there's an answer that is clear, simple, and raw. And this is premature factulation. That's exactly what he's talking about. Why do we commit premature factulation? I spend the first maybe 120 pages, 130 pages of the book going through these things, and I'm not going to discuss them in any detail. I'm just going to pick out a couple of things. But certainly illusions and self-deception, enormous reason for premature factulation. Our human nature, there are various things there. We're not skeptical enough, skeptical in the right ways. There are ways to be skeptical that are not cynical, but skeptical that really help you sort through all the competing ideas. And just reasoning and thinking errors, things that our brains just are not working the way they ought to figure things out. So the only one, illusions, there's a whole host of them. Subconscious is huge. Not just Freud thinks that, but current cognitive scientists say that 95% of the stuff that we do and the decisions we make arise from our subconscious. But there's a whole lot of things. Self-deception is huge. But I'm going to talk just a little bit about wishful thinking. The rest of them I'm not going to talk about because we don't have much time. After we went to Montaigne's place, actually we flew into Lyon in southeastern France. But in Lyon, back in 1918, early one morning in February, actually it was the 1st of February in 1918, a train arrived in Lyon with French prisoners of war that the Germans and the French had exchanged. You know, the war was over, so they did an exchange. But there was one soldier who was found wandering aimlessly and muttering on the platform. And the family never came. All the other soldiers' family came to pick him up. Nobody came to pick him up. So they took him to the hospital, and still nobody came. And because he couldn't be on his own. I mean, he was just completely, I guess, in those days they called it shell-shocked. And but then they put his photo in the paper in hopes that somebody would recognize this guy. Well, hundreds of families came forward. And here's the interesting thing, which that makes sense, because, well, that kind of looks like him. But dozens of people, wives and mothers, all women, which makes sense. I mean, they lost their son or their husband in the war, said, that's him. And they were serious. I mean, it wasn't, and he was maybe 3 or 4 inches taller than their son or husband, or, you know, had some other thing, different color eyes, I mean, everything. And they sincerely believed, they so wanted to believe that that was their son or husband, that they said, that's him. And pretty soon, they finally found his family. His mother was dead, but they found his father and brother. Interestingly, they came, maybe this is a guy thing, they came in and said, no, it doesn't look like it to me. They eventually realized it was him, because he looked quite different. But anyway, the point I want to make here is, how could you not recognize your son or your husband? Well, you so wanted to believe it that overwhelmed your rational thought process. So I don't think any of us sitting here should say, well, that couldn't happen to me, because I think it probably could happen. How many times do we do this? Where what we want to have to be the truth, we contort the facts so that we have that be the truth.